I went to Jantar Mantar. I didn't go up on stage and make a speech. I went there instead to listen. And I talked to as many young people. People saw me, they gathered around me, they started telling me their stories, their experiences. It was the night after the police brutality on Monday. So I went on the Tuesday, the 21st of July. And some of that went live on Instagram. People may have seen it. But my message to them very clearly was not really a message other than you have a right to be heard. What was done to you should not have been done. And there were young girls talking about some pretty bad behavior as well as what they had witnessed on the part of the police. There was these shocking accounts of plainclothes police officers using weapons that the uniformed police were not using. Uniformed police had lathis. The plainclothes fellows had lathis with nails studded in them. And of course, pellet guns and other things. The whole thing was very, very, very badly handled. And as you know, the result in the end worked out the students' favor. The public opinion was so outraged by what had been done to these kids who represent the future of India, as you all know and understand, that I think it became inevitable that the government would have to bend its knee and listen. And you know, Rishabh, there are a couple of things about political reality we must understand. There have been protests before, even as this government has become more and more powerful, winning more and more seats, entrenching itself with almost a sense of invincibility. And yet, this time, these protests couldn't be written off or marginalized. You know, the CAA protests, they managed to somehow portray it as just a Muslim issue, minority issue, one group of people. The farmers' protests, even though they ended up giving into it, was still a sectional interest. Only the farmers, and that too of some particularly prosperous states where there was a specific issue of the subsidies at the market level for the farmers. It was only them, so doesn't matter. We can diffuse that and the rest of the country will still vote for us, all of that. But this was middle-class, urban, Hindi-speaking, largely Hindu India from right across the north, which is the strongest base of the ruling party. And they couldn't ignore that. And I think that's ultimately what clinched it. They gave in, they agreed to something that they had earlier, when they first talked to the students, they said, resignation is off the table, don't even raise it. But this, a few days later, that's what happened.
But Dr. Bhagwat yesterday clarified that, you know, the fact that the people who were protesting were not anti-national. He said that Gen Z are not anti-national. He said that I stand with Gen Z. So they're not... They, for one, now have accepted the fact that this is not a narrative that needs to play out in this manner in front of general public. They also believe that young people are the future of the country, and that's what he made in the statements yesterday. Another interesting thing that he said yesterday was about the LGBTQ community. And I probed him and I asked him, saying that, what about same-sex marriage? And he said same-sex marriage will also happen at some point in time, though it may not happen immediately because perhaps society, according to him, is not ready for it as of now. But then he did mention that same-sex companionship is something that should be legalized and there should be laws that should be passed in order to govern that structure and to make sure that these people are not prosecuted against in any way. Now, this was a very progressive stance, according to me, for the RSS. What do you make of that statement? Do you agree and do you concur with that, or do you think that we should have same-sex marriage?
It's a very good sign. I think I've been watching Mr. Bhagwat's messaging, and to some degree Mr. Hosobal's as well, over the last decade or so. And there's been a very, very clear desire to tone down the things about the RSS that many of us have objected to over the years. I'll give you one very interesting example, is that they've issued a new edition of their Guru Golwalkar's speeches and writings, which have stripped out most of his incendiary and frankly offensive material. I mean, for example, he had written in the 1940s that what Hitler did to the Jews was a welcome example for what India should do to its Muslims. I mean, can you imagine? And it was often rightly quoted as an example of why the RSS's thinking was so unacceptable. That's no longer there in the new edition. So you're seeing that they're trying to say we are not what we used to be, kind of thing. The second thing that...
Ideologies evolve, and that is true for all ideologies. They have evolved over a period of time and not stayed necessarily true to what was mentioned at the very outset.
Arguably, though the entire logic of the RSS's existence is the promotion of a particular notion of Hindutva and of India as a Hindu Rashtra. So that core identity, core ideology has not been diluted. But what it means, for example, is being diluted. So Mr. Bhagwat has said, for example, that Hindu Rashtra does not mean there is no place for Muslims, for example, or for Christians. He has said that as far as he's concerned, an India without Muslims would not be an India at all. Now, those are statements you would not have imagined one of his predecessors 40 years ago saying, or 50 years ago, or 60 years ago. And I think that the fact that at the centenary year of the RSS, they are making these conciliatory noises, it is partially encouraging in its own right as an idea, but partially it may also be a reflection of the fact that now they have essentially been tasting power for a dozen years. And with power, they realize comes responsibility. You can't afford to say the kinds of incendiary things your leaders used to say when you had 2% of the vote, which is what the Hindutva movement had at the time that Golwalkar was leading the RSS. So there is now a difference. There is a change. Does that mean that Mr. Bhagwat, who in any case is not a politician, he's the head of what he calls a cultural organization, does that mean that what he's saying has political implications? I believe it does, because everyone understands the relationship between the RSS and the ruling party of India, the BJP. And therefore, when he says something, it is a lesson or a message that is also heard by politicians in the BJP ecosystem. The Sangh Parivar, as you know, includes the whole lot under the umbrella of the RSS. 2,500
organizations that they've inspired.
And therefore, you can't entirely say that Mr. Bhagwat is speaking purely as a cultural or social figure. He has no political role. I think what he says lays out certain markers for the politicians to follow. And I think that the fact that he chose to accept your invitation to address young people is a welcome sign also, because they've just gone through this process of frankly suffering, tasting a bit of a defeat at the hands of the young. And if this is a gesture of reconciliation, of reaching out, of saying, look, we don't want to demonize you, and we don't want you to demonize us, let's talk. Not everybody will accept that offer, but it's still an offer.
I won't go into the debate of how the RSS has progressed or the views have progressed over a period of time, because that is better suited to somebody who is part of the ideology and who believes in, who represents the right. I would like to believe Ayman brings together both the left and the right, so I will stick to those kind of questions which I did yesterday, where the conversation veered to more things about mental health, climate change, LGBTQ, and issues which were relevant and pertinent to Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Eventually even did clock it at the end of it. So what I'm trying to say is that the invitation, of course, from our end, and you know this very well, that Sarsanga Chalakji has spoken on numerous occasions at Ayman. So this was not the first time that he was engaging with young people. He's been constantly doing that. Even if it was an outreach, as it has been seen in the media, this is a positive outreach. This is something that is...
And the context of what happened in the last few months with Gen Z, that's what makes it particularly relevant.
Correct. And you do accept that this is a very positive outcome in terms of the conversation that was had, in terms of the issues that he raised and...
Yeah. I mean, there are some in our country who will wish that you had not provided him a platform at all. And that is something which I believe goes against the spirit of democracy. In our democracy, we should hear all voices, and we should, frankly, be able to understand the voices we don't agree with in order to be able to refute them and react to them. It's the old Indian concept of Purva Paksha. In Purva Paksha, which is part of the Samvad tradition where you debate, the first obligation of a sort of member who is opposing a proposition is supposed to be to understand the proposition's arguments fully and be able to summarize them accurately before he can refute them. If you have not listened to the other side, how can you refute them? That is the presumption. And therefore, in Purva Paksha, what you start off with is by listening to the other side, digesting what they've said, being able to summarize it accurately, and then refute it. And in these old historical debates that happened in ancient India, that was the principle. You don't just give your own arguments, you also have to engage with the other side. And that, I think, is a style of debating that perhaps we've tended to lose in recent years. Our democracy has become so polarized that both sides today in our parliament, the government and the opposition, give short shrift not only to the other's views, not only to the other's ideas or thinking, But even to their legitimacy, if one side is demonizing, the other side is anti-national. And the other side is sort of seeing themselves as the beleaguered Kauravas, the beleaguered Pandavas, facing sort of this entrenched Kaurava regime that they need to resist because it's inherently evil, then where is the possibility of mutual dialogue?
No, so that's the reason why we had him yesterday and we requested you to come in and speak today. But there are no Pandavas and Kauravas because we are essentially a part of the same India that is Bharat.
But so were they. So were they. And that's part of the problem.
But I think...
In fact, you remember Arjun's great dilemma in the Bhagavad Gita was, how do I attack and kill my own cousins, my own brothers, my own sisters, my own friends? I mean, this is not something... This was one India, even then.
It was one India, but Vedanta speaks about non-duality in a way. But any which way, rather than going down that road, the idea essentially is that you spoke about the opposition. And the opposition, one of the things that I notice, and a lot of young people see, and they agree to in the organization, is sometimes the opposition seems to be opposing. And this is the popular notion as well amongst those who support the government, that the opposition opposes for the sake of opposing. That there should be more people who should give credit to the government where it's due and then hold them responsible like you do. But when we see you doing that, then even in your case, you get reprimanded by your own party.
Well, so, I mean, you should see the enthusiasm of the supporters for wanting me expelled and defenestrated and drawn and quartered or whatever other metaphor you want.
So what
the irony, however, is this has been in our politics for too long. Before I came into politics, we had a situation where, you all know the BJP government under Jaswant Singh, for example, as foreign minister, was negotiating with great effort the Indo-US nuclear deal. They lost the elections of 2004. Dr. Manmohan Singh came to power. And the Indian government of the Congress continued negotiating the deal and concluded it in the teeth of greatest opposition from the BJP. Now, what was bizarre was the BJP was opposing a process they themselves had initiated. Now, what is interesting, we learned a couple of years later from WikiLeaks. You remember WikiLeaks, when all the confidential cables for some years of the US government was brought out in the public domain? What had happened? American envoys had come to Delhi and seen all the leaders of the BJP, Mr. Vajpayee, Mr. Advani, and all these people saying, we are utterly mystified. This is what you wanted when you were in government. Why are you doing this? And they said to the American envoys on the record, for them, but not for public consumption in India, look, this is just opposition in India. We actually want this to happen. But the same people who were assuring the Americans that they were not against it, and if they came to power, they would support it, they moved a no-confidence motion against Dr. Manmohan Singh for doing what they wanted to do themselves. And sure enough, when they came to power, they cheerfully inherited what Mr. Manmohan Singh had achieved and carried on with it. They never said, we're going to scrap this deal when we come to power. So this is unfortunately what opposition has come to mean in India, and it's disastrous. I disagree fundamentally with this. I don't think that when it comes to national interests, that your petty politics should have come in the way. If the BJP genuinely believed that the Indo-US nuclear deal was right for the country, they should have had the courage to say, we disagree with you on that and this, but we support you on this particular issue.
And about the Indo-US nuclear deal, of course, you've thrown light upon. But one issue that is very relevant to the educators who are sitting and to IMAN, of course, and you know better than most that the number of schools that we work with, is the anti-paper leak bill that came up in Parliament. And 11 hours were allotted to the debate finally. That is what we saw, and we were
I got 9 minutes out of that, but I did speak for those 9 minutes.
And in the 11 hours, of course, the bill had loopholes. One for sure, which was pointed out in your speech, where you mentioned very articulately that you can set up fast-track courts, but look at the number of cases that are pending. The total number of cases are 5 crore cases in our country. So it's obvious that we
but even the fast-track courts that the BJP government has set up have 2.65 lakh pending cases as of the end of last year.
I understand. But the point that a lot of people were making, and what even I would like to say, is that out of the 11 hours, the 1 hour could have been utilized for essentially passing this bill, because there were certain things in this bill. Of course, a lot of improvement was required, but there were many things in the bill which also made sense. So what if the opposition passed that bill in the first hour.
We didn't.
And in the remaining 10, sorry sir, but in the remaining 10, what about focusing on education as a subject? What about focusing on the 10 lakh teacher job vacancies? What about focusing on the 1 lakh schools that don't have female toilets? What about focusing on the 15,000 schools that don't have water? The idea is that education is a big subject. The government could have been cornered on that subject, but all we saw for those 11 hours is the tutu meme that took place in Parliament, and then eventually the bill met its end. So
you have to exempt some of us. I didn't do any tutu meme. In fact, I began by saying I wouldn't do that because I thought it was undignified to sort of argue about which party had presided over more paper leaks. I mean, what a subject. No, but the problem with your suggestion is, I did go pretty far in suggesting that we should go beyond the question of punishment, which is all that bill dealt with, to also look at prevention. So that was one thing that I could justify as being within the topic. But what you're suggesting would have been deemed to be beyond the topic. You see, when a bill is brought for discussion, you have to confine your objections to the subject of the bill and to matters related thereto, such as whether your party has presided over more leaks than mine and this sort of nonsense. But the truth is that the larger subject of education deserves a different debate, and it is necessary. I don't know whether you saw my open letter to Nandan Nilekani, which I also gave him privately and I've spoken to him about, in which I also went beyond that. Frankly, he told me very privately, so I shouldn't be revealing, but I'll reveal it discreetly, that his focus, he's been given a very precise mandate. And he's not allowed to exceed his mandate. His mandate will be about paper leaks and NEET exams, that sort of thing, period. He will not be able to go beyond into the broader questions.
So you're saying education reforms is something that the grounds of political instability, many governments were destabilized and changed overnight. The Kerala government in 1956 and 57. And 50 times the same clause was used by Indira Gandhi as well. So political vendetta has existed right from the start. Now, of course, sometimes the BJP is accused of it. What do you make of this?
Okay, in the interest of historical accuracy, the CPM was elected in 57, dismissed in 59.
Okay.
So that was the particular incident you began with. But you're right, thereafter Article 356, President's rule, was invoked many times by all governments, including the Congress governments, until a court case in the 90s, in which the Supreme Court said there's got to be much better justifications for dismissing an elected government. And I think now we've seen a dramatic downfall, decrease in that kind of behavior, which therefore the convention is different. So for example, during Dr. Manmohan Singh's time, I don't think there was a single case I can remember of a state government being dismissed. So the Congress of the past was following the earlier conventions. Today, all parties, UPA and NDA governments, respect the fact that the threshold for dismissing an elected state government is very, very high indeed. So I don't think that's going to happen too much. Again, Rishabh, I'm not a great fan of whataboutery. You know, every time somebody raises an objection to something, you say, what about that? You did this. What did you do? What did your uncle do? What did your grandfather do? That's not a meaningful conversation. But we've moved on. We have to look at today. And we have to look at tomorrow, ideally, because tomorrow represents a future for the young people of this country.
But say, like you keep mentioning, if you don't know where you've come from, you won't know where you're going.
My life. So, yes, I take that. You won't appreciate where you're going.
No, I'm just quoting you, but what I'm trying to say is this, sir, that in Parliament, and many people out here will agree that we need more parliamentarians like you who cross the divide and also appreciate people, but some people take crossing the divide quite seriously. They literally join the other side. And the Ayaram Gayaram politics.
That's right.
That everybody in the audience...
There really was a guy called Gayaram, huh?
Yes.
Who crossed parties seven times. Seven times in 3 days. So
the idea that these generations grown up with the Ayaram Gayaram politics. Yeah. Now we're seeing a politics of a different kind where ideology just does not matter. Where suddenly a person who is wearing particular clothes changes the clothes and changes the color and then starts from criticizing the Prime Minister to praising the Prime Minister. Now, when young people are growing up in such an environment, what is your message for your colleagues who shifted ranks and ideologies overnight?
My message has been very clear, very open, very public as well, that politics has to be about principle, because otherwise, what is the profession all about? Why are you in politics? To me, the answer has been obvious from the moment I entered it. Politics is about promoting my vision of a better India. what do I think it takes to create a better India, a better Indian society, a better Indian foreign policy, better Indian economy, whatever it may be. I have a vision, and I associate myself with as many like-minded people as possible who share a comparable or at least compatible vision, so that we can move the country in the direction we think is appropriate. Just as on the other side, there are people who also have their idea of a better India, but it's a different idea, one that I don't happen to share. Now, it's perfectly legitimate for somebody to evolve and to change their thinking and say, okay, actually, I thought I had the better idea, but their idea is better. In which case, resign, because you've been elected on the basis of the first idea. Then go off and get elected again if the people agree with your change of heart. But to be elected on one set of convictions, or one brand, if you like, or on the name of one leader, as many of our friends in the TMC were, and then to, while keeping that seat that you won on that basis, switch over to the very opposite and join the very people you campaigned against, that shows an utterly startling lack of conviction, of principle, of commitment to anything worthwhile other than your own self-interest. Many of these people have shifted for expedient reasons, whether it is, as some people allege, the temptations of lucre, of incentives, whether it is because some of them would otherwise have had cases against them which suddenly will vanish in the famous washing machine that the ruling party apparently operates, or whether it is for other kinds of hopes of advancement. That becomes very troubling and very, very difficult for anybody with any set of principles to accept, because then why were they in politics in the first place, and what do they really believe? And I'm sorry to say, Rishabh, some of the people who've done this are from your Gen Z. So there's one young man, I won't name any names. I won't name any names. There's one young man who very famously switched, having been opposing the BJP line. No names. There's one young woman who was hailed as the most effective campaigner under Mamata Banerjee's banner during the Bengal elections this year, and who is now on the other side, having been the most brilliant at skewering the people that she is now supporting. And these are both young people who belong to Gen Z. So all I can say is that I don't think this weakness of politics as being all about power and pelf actually is about any generation. It's not just the old people who are corrupt and unprincipled. Sadly, it seems those labels apply across the demographic divide.
I'll let those politicians that you spoke about answer this question when they hear this clip. But for now,
I'm sure they'll answer it colorfully and with passion and defend themselves.
The question is, which color do they answer it from? Well, and
I remember a youngish friend of mine who, when he switched from our party to the opposite one, in his first few speeches, kept asking people to vote for the hand, because he had forgotten that he was no longer. He was so used to doing it for a long time, and the YouTube videos are still around. But anyway, there you are.
But so this is the state of politics today. And sometimes I feel that students in a model UN conference or a Lok Sabha, actually in a mock Lok Sabha, debate much better than the parliamentarians do. And sorry for stating this to a parliamentarian, but you know, the kind of conduct that we see, everybody just starts doing narebazi or the sloganeering in parliament. There is a place for Andolan.
That's
right. There is a place for dissent in that form. But parliament is for samvad. It is not for vivad. And like you said, let's not focus on the past, let's focus on the present and the future.
Correct.
And therefore my question is this, that when do we see constructive dialogue in parliament, given the fact that the ruling party says that the opposition doesn't allow for us to function, and the opposition says that the ruling party does not want us to present our demands? I think people are tired of listening to this. And therefore, I'm asking the question to somebody who's erudite enough, hopefully, in order to drill sense into a lot many.
My views have been on record for some time, because I've been objecting, even within my own party, to this tactic. And everyone knows it. It's not something that needs to be hidden anymore. And my line is very simple. Sadak ka kaam ab sadak pe kijiye, sadan ka kaam ab sadan pe kijiye. Sadak ka kaam sadan mat leke aiye. I mean, it's as simple as that. But, you know, there are a number of factors in this. One is that
So, before
Wait, you,
elucidate.
you know, you probably went to a school where you learned the golden rule as a young man: do unto others what you would have them do unto you. The golden rule of Indian politics has changed. It is now do unto others what they have done unto you. So, when the BJP was in opposition, they disrupted the House. Entire sessions were washed out. Congress says, okay, when the BJP is in power, we'll show them. It will do exactly the same thing. And this is now becoming, honestly, completely unproductive for the very simple reason that, as Rishabh rightly said, there is no problem with all sorts of political demonstrations, dharnas, hartals, gheraos, sloganeering, narebazi, whatever, jantar mantar protests. All those are legal, constitutional, permitted in our democratic framework. But the temple of our democracy is a place where you go for prayer in the form of argument, debate, and reasoned thinking. One of my concerns is it is actually we, the opposition, who benefit the most from Parliament. Why? Because we get to question the ministers during question hour, put them on the spot, challenge them. We are the ones who get to raise our constituency issues under provisions called zero hour, matters of urgent public importance, Rule 377, and so on, which is necessary for us because we're not in power. A minister doesn't need that. A minister or even a ruling party MP can get his work done because he's in power, his party's in power. The opposition needs to flag these issues and put them on record. We're cheating ourselves of both the question hour principle and the constituency matters or any matters of national importance we wanted to raise. And we are also losing the opportunity to place our views on record on the kind of legislation the government brings to us. See, you have to understand, it's not just only for the Samvad's sake. This has profound implications. A couple of years ago, a High Court judge said, you brought a case about this particular bill. How am I to understand the legislative intent of the bill when there was no debate in Parliament when it was passed? And he's totally correct. The government has not had a chance to explain why they're bringing the bill, other than this sort of pro forma statement of objects and reasons that is published along with the bill. And the opposition has neither refuted it nor given a counter logic that the government was forced to respond to. You see, the whole assumption behind this kind of disruption is the government will pass the bill anyway because they have the votes. But Vajpayee Sahib, when he was in the opposition in the 1960s, made a famous comment that I've frequently quoted when he said to Mrs. Gandhi, who was Prime Minister in the late 60s, he said, we have the arguments, you have the votes. So the arguments have their place, the votes have their place. There's a lovely old cliche. The opposition must have its say, even if the government will have its way. And that is what Parliament is all about. Now, you may or may not like the idea of a parliamentary democracy, but if you have a parliament, this is how you should use it. By disrupting it day after day, washing out entire sessions, you are actually depriving the opposition of an opportunity to do all these things that I've mentioned to you.
Then do you think, in the interest of what you've just said, there was a protest that was led by Rahul Gandhi, the leader of the opposition, right outside the Prime Minister's residence?
That's fine. That's part of the democracy. He's not doing it inside Parliament. He's also doing it inside Parliament.
He does a lot inside Parliament as well. So what do you make, considering now you mentioned it, what do you make of the protests inside Parliament?
No, so the protests inside Parliament, I've already addressed in my earlier answer. Protests outside the Prime Minister's house, I think, is a legitimate place. I mean, what is so sort of sanctified about the Prime Minister that you can't protest outside his residence? Obviously, security will sort of create a perimeter beyond which we can't interfere. So if he's busy meeting some other Prime Minister or President, the protest cannot go so far as to disrupt the functioning of government. But it's not a bad place to drive home the message the Prime Minister is ultimately accountable. Look, in all democracies, accountability is vital. And let me say to you all that one of my big concerns has always been, whoever has been in power, state or center, parties, whatever, has been the question of accountability. We cannot reduce democracy just to elections every 5 years. There has to be accountability between those elections. So that when you can actually question your quote-unquote rulers, so that's the wrong word in a democracy, as to what they've done, how they've spent your taxpayers' money, why they've taken certain decisions, why they haven't taken other decisions. That's what democracy is. The stuff of democracy happens between elections. Unfortunately, many in our country have confused matters and assume that democracy is what you do every 5 years when you go and vote. I'm sorry, that's not even 1% of what democracy is all about.
Another thing that democracy is all about is a strong government but a strong opposition.
I agree.
But then the problem, sir, is that the number the numbers of the opposition are dwindling in terms of the Indian National Congress, which for a long time has been at the forefront of everything that has happened in India. If,
But it has gone up in
statistics,
3 elections, right? We went from
So, but-
44 in 2014 to 52 in 2019 to 100, 99.
99.
in-
But if you now compare
It's
this,
actually 100. Rahul Gandhi won 2 seats. So then it became 99 and then we've got it
sure,
again.
we'll give you the century there. But sir, in terms of now, you've given these numbers, but when you compare these numbers to the numbers of the past, where you had about 2,500 at your peak, in 2004 to 2014, you have 1,200. So from
You're
12
referring to MLAs now.
to MLAs, yes.
Yeah, MLAs.
And also, so the idea is that you've, at one point in time, you had so very many MLAs. Now you have around 650. Even in Parliament, you had thumping majority at one point in time, and now you're reduced to below a 3-digit number, or say a three-digit number. The fact that the Indian National Congress is perhaps losing ground in terms of electoral politics, and I'm not saying that the idea of India may not resonate, but somehow it's happening such that the votes are going to the BJP. So what is your take on the opposition, and what is it that the Indian National Congress is getting wrong, according to you?
I think the problem with your question, Rishabh, is the use of the present tense. Everything you said was probably true up to a point, though, as I said, mathematically you were not right on the Lok Sabha. But the general narrative you made looking at MLA numbers and so on, no one can disagree with, till about 6 months ago. What has crystallized in the last 6 months is that there is a definite change in the atmosphere within the country, in which a lot of people who clearly were unhappy with the government but didn't have the courage to express it, have now decided that thanks to the courage of the young people, the cockroaches and the Jantar Mantar protesters, etc., that they too can now speak out openly. The number of conversations that people are having right across, and I'm talking not just about, fringe groups, minority interests, whatever. I'm talking about mainstream Indians from across middle-class India should deeply worry the BJP. And I suspect that what we heard from Mr. Bhagwat in this forum yesterday was in fact itself a reflection of the fact that they are really worried, that their hold on this electorate that they were taking for granted may just have begun to slip away. And that's why I said I wouldn't use the present tense. You said the BJP is winning elections. What happened just earlier this week? They lost Bankipur, which they had won 9 times in a row for over 3 decades of elections. They lost it. In Datia, the Congress retained a seat from which its MLA had quit, had passed away, I think. I can't remember the circumstances now. But anyway, we won the seat again. These are both Hindi heartland states, Bihar and Madhya Pradesh respectively. Something is going on which I think the BJP is making, because they're a very good electoral machine. They've woken up to realize they have a challenge on their hands. And so the techniques they used earlier, such as breaking up opposition parties, the TMC and the Shiv Sena Thakre, and getting their elected MPs to defect, that isn't going to work so easily with others. I mean, there are similar attempts with Mr. Pawar's NCP clearly have faltered. And
But sir, you
I'm just saying,
okay.
I think that when the actual judgment is going to be made by voters, the general voting public, and not by opportunistic MPs switching sides, I suspect you're going to get a very different result at the next opportunity. And let me say there are encouraging straws in the wind. My party just won a state which we had not held for 10 years. Okay, it wasn't against the BJP government, it was against the CPM, but we've won Kerala. We have at least 3 states coming up in March of next year where we are very much in play, Punjab, Uttarakhand and Himachal, and these are in North India, not in the South. I think that we're looking at winds that are shifting, and I would urge people to look carefully at all that. Yes, there are other factors in elections, efficient organization, money power, muscle power, various other things come into play, media manipulation. There are various issues that come. I'm not saying any result is guaranteed for anybody, and we know which party is better at all of the above than some other parties. But still, I would say don't take any outcomes for granted anymore. Something has shifted in this country. Now, maybe the BJP will be good enough to shift it back. I don't know, but we are now going to give them a very, very good challenge because we have the courage and the evidence from the ground and the feedback from ordinary voters that suggest that truly this country's democracy is truly in play once again.
You mentioned all of these points and vehemently articulated how there are fault lines in Indian democracy and essentially the protest brought them to light in a way. But it's also true for the opposition. My question was about the opposition, about the Indian National Congress. It's also true that the cockroaches managed to garner 22 million followers on Instagram. This is something that the Indian National Congress has not been able to do.
The BJP put together.
Yes.
BJP and Congress put together didn't have that at that time.
So this basically means that yes, young people are disillusioned. Yes, there is a problem in education. Yes, there's a problem with climate change. Yes, there are glaring loopholes in Indian democracy. But this somehow is not resonating when it comes to the kind of movement that we saw at Jantar Mantar. That's not the same movement that is being seen for the Indian National Congress. So the thing is that the Indian National Congress, of course, like you articulated, yes, there are problems in the BJP, etc. But they've not been able to get the attention of Gen Z and Gen Alpha in that sense and to that degree and measure that the cockroaches perhaps have.
Look, I'm very, very conscious of what you said. In fact, I've happened to have written a column for next week in which I'm going to make the argument that we have to be conscious of the fact, all the opposition parties, that we didn't provide a route into our parties for the kinds of people who were in Jantar Mantar last month. And to my mind, that is actually something we really need to examine. How do young people get into established parties where there are hierarchies, entrenched establishments, dynastic considerations, political networks? How does a new young person come in? And if they come in, what do they get to do? To stand behind the established leaders, to make up the numbers in mass rallies, to do sort of foot soldier work? Can they actually be the people who make the difference? And I think one thing that I've been arguing, we haven't had an opportunity to BJP put together.
Yes.
BJP and Congress put together didn't have that at that time.
So this basically means that yes, young people are disillusioned. Yes, there is a problem in education. Yes, there's a problem with climate change. Yes, there are glaring loopholes in Indian democracy. But this somehow is not resonating when it comes to the kind of movement that we saw at Jantar Mantar. That's not the same movement that is being seen for the Indian National Congress. So the thing is that the Indian National Congress, of course, like you articulated, yes, there are problems in the BJP, etc. But they've not been able to get the attention of Gen Z and Gen Alpha in that sense and to that degree and measure that the cockroaches perhaps have.
Look, I'm very, very conscious of what you said. In fact, I've happened to have written a column for next week in which I'm going to make the argument that we have to be conscious of the fact, all the opposition parties, that we didn't provide a route into our parties for the kinds of people who were in Jantar Mantar last month. And to my mind, that is actually something we really need to examine. How do young people get into established parties where there are hierarchies, entrenched establishments, dynastic considerations, political networks? How does a new young person come in? And if they come in, what do they get to do? To stand behind the established leaders, to make up the numbers in mass rallies, to do sort of foot soldier work? Can they actually be the people who make the difference? And I think one thing that I've been arguing, we haven't had an opportunity to have an internal discussion about this in any forum that I'm part of. But that's why I use the public space to make this point. I think we really, as the American expression goes, need to wake up and smell the coffee. Let not our epitaph be that we were bypassed or became irrelevant because we failed to listen. And what Rishabh has said, something that echoes with me. The established parties will cease to be relevant unless they can listen to the new voices that they haven't heard so far. And I think, frankly, we should have started hearing them already with this. Interestingly enough, the issues taken up by the CJP and the Jantar Mantar protesters had been taken up by us earlier. We had a Chatron Ki Gunj thing where Rahul Gandhi was addressing students about the paper leaks, about the things
and
so
that
on.
didn't resonate. Sorry to interrupt, but that didn't resonate as much as this did.
Correct. And that's why we need to ask ourselves, what did we fail to do? Did we fail to listen? Did we fail to tap into the old cliche of having your finger on the pulse of the people? Was our finger missing from the pulse of Gen Z? And that's something we really need to interrogate and solve it.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that Gen Z and Gen Alpha will not agree to the things that millennials did in a way. Okay. That, we were, as we were talking in our academic meeting, and Amish Tripathi said this beautifully. He said, you are perhaps the most polite generation of them all, Rishabh, the millennials that are. And I don't think...
You're barely a millennial, right? You're still on the cusp or something.
Fair enough, but the idea, I don't know whether to take that as a compliment or whether to take it on the polite remark that I made. But the idea that Gen Z and Alpha are not going to, play along. They want answers and they want a better world. They're not okay with status quo.
Correct.
The issue is, however, sir, that when it comes to the cockroaches also, it became a political thing. It became about the resignation of a person. It became about Dharmendra Pradhan chale jao. Now the issue is, the problem yet remains, irrespective of the minister that comes out there.
The system has to be fixed.
The system has to change.
I said that in Parliament, right? We're here to discuss a system that is broken and we have to find ways of fixing it.
We carried one placard and on the last day of the protest, I was at Azad Maidan. And I said, not for CJP, not for BJP, we are for education, how many like us. Now the problem is this, that when young people want an outlet in order to voice themselves, they don't get taken seriously because Gen Z and Gen Alpha are thought to be young. Anybody who is below the age of 19 is never considered. And therefore, an outlet like CJP got so much of relevance. Till date, they have not made one reasonable demand on education. They have not spoken about an education manifesto. And yet we are giving them so much of mileage. The government is talking to them. They're engaging with them. And sometimes I think to myself saying, look, you're engaging with people just because they're doing an Andolan. Perhaps Ayaman has 150,000 schools. All of us should do an Andolan. So the thing is that people are only given importance when you make a lot of noise. And up until the time we used PR and we called cameras and said, please listen to this conversation. Nobody was listening to the conversation. So how, my question to you is this.
Well, there's a cliche about that. The squeaky wheel gets the most grease, you see. So those who are making the noise will get the attention. But anyway, go on.
So the thing is that we're giving credence to what I perceive and what I believe are elements that don't necessarily fully understand the issue, when actually there exist many organizations like this organization that are working on the issue and that are interacting with Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And therefore, then when you want to have Samvad in whichever form, and thank you for having Samvad today, and yesterday the Samvad took place, but when the entire country in a way is protesting, then you have now suddenly realized saying, dekho, samvad karna zaruri hai, and therefore everybody is reaching out and saying, let's do samvad. Therefore, my question to you is this, that movements such as CJP have got a lot of relevance. How do movements that believe in dialogue, which you head in a way in terms of chairing the advisory board, how do we make sure that the voice reaches those who actually matter?
There are a few parts, and first thing you should not forget, Gen Alpha, unfortunately, for the most part, will still be too young in 2029, but Gen Z will actually be the single largest voting cohort in the next general election.
So they're already 40 crore, and Gen Alpha will get there.
Not in time for the next election. They have to turn 18 by the 1st of January 2029.
And they'll just one year of them will be perhaps 18. Yes, one.
Yeah, so
yes.
it'll be a very, very small cohort from Gen Alpha, but Gen Z will literally, they're already the largest single population block in the country, and in 29 they'll be the largest single voting block in the country. Not only us, by the way, the Bangladeshis, the Pakistanis, the Nepalese all have very similar demographic profiles, Sri Lanka. So much of the subcontinent has got to wake up and come to grips with the phenomenon that young people now want change. Business as usual will not hack it, and the traditional ways of doing things are no longer good enough. And this is a lesson that every politician, all these countries, has to learn. One of the things that in India, because India is not Bangladesh, you're not going to just march on Delhi and bring the government down, that's not going to happen. You're going to create, it seems to me, credible platforms, credible movements. Maybe they'll come through different political parties. Maybe CJP, for example, has announced that they are not going to be a party, they're going to be a movement, even though they call themselves a party, whatever it may be. You can influence the people, you influence the decisions about the people who are actually going to exercise power in your name. And that is, in any democracy, the classic power of the people. You get to decide your own political destiny by entrusting it to people whose views you trust and who are going to execute the mandate you want them to in all these areas. Now, on the larger question you addressed, yes, the system needs fixing. It's not just paper leaks. It is the nature of education. You'll find speeches by me on YouTube going back 15, 16 years, to students, to teachers, to principals, saying, for God's sake, don't teach children what to think, teach them how to think. This is before AI was even a thing. The fact is, this is what we need, and we're not doing enough of it in our school system, and certainly not in our schools, and not enough in our colleges. We need to move away from an exam-oriented culture to a thinking-oriented culture, and thinking, processing, debating, how to grasp unfamiliar ideas, and so on. All of this is out there. There's a way in which we can change the educational system. But at the end of that, there is still a fundamental problem. In the old days, a college degree was a guarantee of a job. It no longer is. Now, even an IIT graduation is not a guarantee of a job. And that is something which is something totally new for this generation to deal with that the millennials did not have to deal with. The millennials, looking back, had all the fruits of the liberalization, all the advantages of growing economy, of new possibilities, etc. This lot is in some areas seeing a diminishing of possibilities and a mismatch between the number of people seeking possibilities, the capabilities or talents or qualifications they've been able to acquire, and the actual opportunities available for jobs and careers. And this is going to require some very profound thinking. I'm not going to give you any glib answers, but this is partially the way we have to redesign the system so that these problems which are fundamental can be answered.
But so my question yet remains, if we are going to give, my question remains for this reason, if we are yet going to give credibility to movements that simply demand resignation and do not actually ask. Correct.
Everyone said, I mean, the day the gentleman resigned, a lot of people said, this is only a very small step. If anything, it's not even the end of the beginning, it is just the beginning, right? I mean, what you need now is to go beyond the individual as a symbol of what was wrong on one particular mistake, but see what that mistake itself signifies for the larger ecosystem from which it comes.
But shouldn't this come in the form of dialogue, which of course should have happened with the protesters on day one, which I maintain, but should also happen regularly
in
by
Parliament?
The opposition, by the government, in Parliament, outside Parliament with Gen Z and Gen Alpha? When will we see actually parliamentarians getting out on the street, having these roundtable conversations with Gen Z and Alpha and listening to their wants, desires and aspirations? Is this wishful thinking? Will this happen?
No, I think it will happen at the individual level as it's happening today and tomorrow at Ayman. These things will happen.
And I'm so sorry to interrupt, but they do it through their party lines. So the Congress will do it through the youth wing, the BJP does it through BJYM. The idea that I see is that they don't come to neutral platforms as much. Of course, Ayman's been lucky that we brought the leader of opposition also, we've got Mohanji also, we've got you, we've got different people. But they don't seem to come to neutral platforms as much as they would prefer to be in the echo chambers. And the echo chambers is what is leading young India to then believe, saying, look, if they're not listening to us, let's get on the street, let's make some noise, let's get the solutions, and then only will they listen. So don't you think it's a failure of all political parties in that sense when it comes to engaging with young people?
I think you're right. There you are. You got the answer from the audience. Yeah, it is a failure on the part of our political processes that we have insulated ourselves as a political establishment from people and their views in between elections. I said this earlier, I'm repeating it now. There should be more forums, neutral ones or impartial ones, even advocacy ones. Let's go to a platform that has a particular point of view, listen to their point of view, offer our own thoughts, imbibe from the conversation, move on. I think this is how politics ought to work. And in ideal democracies, this is how it should work, because it is the way in which we in politics can have a constant new infusion of ideas, a sort of an ideas transplant from all of you. I mean, I can't obviously have the experiences that a 25 or a 30-year-old has lived through. By the way, I make it a point to hire people from that age group in my own office, so I'm constantly getting inputs as well from the young people. But I'm just saying, we need to have much more receptivity, because that's from that change and meaningful, effective change flows. But change must still come through constitutional processes. A protest or a demonstration or narrabazi is not going to bring you change. Change requires all sorts of time-consuming, processes. It includes making decisions, consulting, arriving at a policy framework, finding the resources to implement that, writing a law, writing the rules to implement the law, passing it. There's a whole lot of grunge work that somebody protesting with a placard may not fully appreciate.
I understand. And, there's paucity of time. So this is my second last question to you. You had a beautiful conversation with D.Y. Chandrachud, sir. And this was about reservation. And you had it at the IMN platform. First time we brought the two of you together. And you spoke extensively about reservation. Yesterday I touched upon reservation as well. Reservation was supposed to be for...
What did Mr. Bhagwat say about reservation?
Oh, it's a very interesting thing. He said that of course reservation cannot be undone immediately, but the beneficiaries of reservation should get reservation per se. So to that effect is what the comment that he made. But I must also ask you about reservation. It's gone from what was originally envisaged as a tool to uplift society to become a tool of politicians in order to canvass for votes. You've got 59.5% reservation. You've got 23 lakh aspirants and you've got only 1 lakh people or 1,36,000 people who actually then eventually get into the IITs. And the problem with this is that when you have so much of reservation, it drives those who do not get these seats, and then we see the numbers that 19 committed suicide, or over the last 20 years from 2004 to 2024, 2,25,000 students have committed suicide. Reservation
Tragic.
is a big concern, but reservation is not touched upon. Reservation has only increased. Nobody dares talk about reservation because that will be the end of their political career.
Precisely.
But I know that you put the country and young people above politics. So I'm going to ask you for a very candid response on reservation. Not a political response, but a candid response. Do you think reservation is needed in the India of 2026? And if so, why?
So reservation, in absolute terms, yes, because it's not just about politics, it's about social justice. Our Dalit community, for example, the scheduled castes, have been discriminated against for 3,000 years. You can't wipe that away in 300 or 30, and you can't therefore deny them the recognition that this society owes them a moral debt. And this is something that's important. At the same time, what Dr. Ambedkar, who first introduced reservations into the Constitution, talked about was the annihilation of caste. He wanted to change the mindset of people to get them out from thinking of people according to caste. Interestingly, Nehruji thought the same way. He actually thought and wrote that caste would disappear. But instead, what we have done instead of annihilating caste is we have entrenched caste. And you're right that the reason we've done that is politics, because caste has become an instrument of mobilization, right? And that means essentially what? That you get people to vote on the basis of identities rather than on the basis of either principles or performance or political programs. And that, to my mind, has been one of the troubling tendencies in our politics. At the same time, you're quite right in saying that no politician is going to challenge the principle of reservation, partially because, of course...
But Gen Z and Gen Alpha wants you to perhaps, they're looking to people like you.
So what we can look at and what I think needs to be looked at is, how do we dilute the colossal impact of the numbers you were talking about by giving more people opportunities? There are various things that can be done. One is, of course, to have more job possibilities for those who actually are applying from other categories. But the second, quite frankly, is to go back to a Supreme Court judgment, which, to my astonishment, has remained neglected not only by the government, but by the opposition and by the Supreme Court since it was passed in 2015. And that is the Jat reservation judgment of Justices Gogoi and Nariman. Gogoi went on to become Chief Justice, but he never spoke about it again. And Nariman is considered one of our finest Supreme Court justices. What did they say? They said that the time has come, this is in response to an appeal against the reservation of posts for Jats in Haryana. And they basically said the time has come to end the practice of deciding reservation only on the basis of birth in a particular community. Their judgment said that reservation is a valid tool to promote social justice in a democracy. But to determine who deserves social justice, birth into a particular community is no longer enough. And it demanded that the government come back with a matrix of disabilities. So you have a whole list of issues, which you would obviously arrive at through committees and discussion and public consultation and so on, where yes, being in a disadvantaged caste should get you some points, Being, for example, a single mother should get you some points. Being from a very poor socioeconomic community or group should get you some points. Being from a particularly ill-treated minority should get you some, whatever it may be. The judges said, come back with a matrix of disabilities, which is objective for all, irrespective of what community they're born, and then we can decide. So somebody who's from a so-called upper caste, but suffers all these other disabilities, has no income, has no father, living with a single mother, is from a desperately poor family, and is ineligible for the same post as other disadvantaged people because he or she belongs to the wrong caste. Under that formula, that person could have also been eligible for some of the reservation. And then reduce, in that basis, reduce the percentage of the number of seats reserved so others can compete on merit elsewhere. Now, that kind of formula, when that judgment was passed, I wrote an op-ed about it. And about 10 years later, I wrote another op-ed saying, why has no one picked up this judgment? The honest truth is no one wants to touch it because reservations are a subject on which, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the New York Metro subway system, but it runs on electric trains. They've got 2 rails on which the rails run, and in between there is what's called the third rail. The third rail is what carries the electricity to make the trains run. You touch the third rail and you're electrocuted instantly. And every Indian politician knows that you touch the third rail of Indian reservations and you will be electrocuted politically. No one's going to touch it. That's also true.
Now we have Vande Bharat trains. And I'm hoping they'll find a way in order to function without the third rail. This is what the hope is. But I won't probe
They'll
further.
be called the Viksit Bharat trains after that.
But I won't probe further because this requires perhaps another conversation in regards to reservation. But what I'll ask you as the final question is this. You have progressive views, but you get chastised in your own political party as well. Some say that you are the right man in the wrong party.
But which is the right party, tell me?
So
I've gone to the party
question
with which I have the largest measure of agreement. It doesn't mean I agree all the time. And one of the great questions that has come up in the course of my career is there room for independent thought and independent expression of views in any political party in India? I don't think I can find another party that has even tolerated someone like me for the length of time that my party has.
So therefore,
I'm not disloyal to my party. I've stayed with it. I've won elections for it. I serve it loyally. But I do express independent views. And I'm sometimes conscious that my independent views can be used by my party's opponents to their advantage. And naturally, my party won't like that. That's something I try and avoid doing. But the truth is, Rishabh, in a polity, the notion that an elected representative should have the right to think for himself and to speak his own mind as part of the process of conversation, samvad, moving the needle, if you like, on the national issues, that to my mind should have been part of democracy. But part of our problem is the parliamentary system puts such a premium on parties. And the parties in turn have got whip systems and rules, and so you can't, if you vote against a party or you go against a party whip, you can even be expelled from parliament. So in those circumstances, there is a degree of conformity in all parties. And don't blame only the Congress. In fact, the Congress in many ways is the least sort of undemocratic of all parties because at least we're able to speak and still survive.
the jury's out on that, I think.
Well, there are other parties where I've never heard, have you heard a word of dissent expressed by anybody in the BJP who survived thereafter? Is there freedom of speech in the BJP and is there freedom after speech in the BJP?
There's a gentleman called Subramaniam Swamy. but Dr. Tharoor, what I will say, my question was this, that for the longest time we've seen you, and even today when you were coming here, I saw what happened on Twitter, we spoke about it briefly as well, that you were reprimanded by certain fringe elements saying that why are you going...
They're not fringe. They're not fringe. That's what's the worrying thing. But go ahead, summarize.
Thank you for validating further my point, which is if they were not fringe, do you think that perhaps it's about time that there is space for a new political party, perhaps headed by somebody like you? A center left, a center right, bridging the gap?
No, look, first of all, on the question of this, the voices on the social media who want me expelled from the Congress because I've come to a platform which Mohan Bhagwat addressed, that, to my mind, reflects a level of intolerance and lack of imagination and lack of willingness to engage with incompatible ideas. That's simply not consistent with democratic principle. Democratic principle is this whole thing. I mean, the old cliche, right? That I disagree with what you say, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. And that is what we all should follow, but we don't increasingly in Indian politics. Now, if we disagree with what you say, we delegitimize you. You should not have the right to say it. You're saying it makes you anti-national or makes you irredeemably evil or whatever. That's the kind of discourse we have. Is there time for a new party? I should ask you the question, because it should be young people like Rishabh and his cohort of Gen Z who need to think about whether they can fulfill their aspirations through the existing parties. Obviously, the existing parties, including me, would hope they can. But then we may have to change ourselves to be able to absorb and accommodate them. And if you conclude that we can't meet your aspirations, then of course you always have the freedom to start your own party. In a democracy, that always happens. But at the end of the day, the party is only a vehicle to get to a larger end. Rishabh, I would urge anyone in this room thinking about politics to first think, what is your vision of a better India? What is your goal? What do you want to do? If politics is only about power, laying your grubby hands on the machinery of government and on the dispensation of favors and on the bank balances of the rich, then to my mind, please don't get into politics. Go off and become an accountant or a management consultant or somebody who can make money through more legitimate ways. I would like to think that those of you who are contemplating politics and those of you who have an answer to Rishabh's question should be people who are animated by a conviction, by a vision. I have made my principles and views very, very clear. I am a liberal who belongs to what one might call the radical center, so that I share a set of beliefs that I've expressed since I was in college. At that time, there was a party that shared most of my views. It was called the Swatantra Party. It disappeared in 1974 when it merged into another party, and that was the end of that. But at its peak in 1967, it had as many seats, 44 in the Lok Sabha, as the Congress was reduced to in 2014. So it was a substantial force, and it articulated core liberal principles, anchored in Indian civilizational values, supported a robust foreign policy and effective things, worked for the interests of the workers, the labor, the farmers at the same time, and stood for a vision that said that individuals should be allowed to be free, to pursue business, to make profit, to have their own thoughts, their own personal lives, their own religious beliefs, and the government had no place in the bedroom, in the kitchen, in your wardrobe, in your temple or mosque or gurdwara. That idea of India has remained mine, and oh, you read, I've got 29 books out there. You can look at my paper trail. Whatever my politics, my principles have been consistent throughout. When I was a critic of some aspects of the ruling Congress, when I was a critic of some aspects of the rising BJP, when I came into politics myself, I've stood for all these things throughout. And no one can truly point out a contradiction in anything I've said or done and written. And therefore, those are my principles. I'm writing a book, finally, not so much in defense of myself, but a sort of history of Indian liberal thought, which I believe goes back to at least 1500 BC. And I'm writing about not just liberal Indian thought, but about the rise and fall, and I hope rise again, of liberal centrism in India. I hope that many of the young will see the merits of what I'm arguing. And that book's only going to be, I've just finished it, so it's got to go through its birth pangs before it comes out at the beginning of next year. But I hope that some of you will read it, and I hope that Rishabh and I will discuss its principles, because those are principles that I believe embody a vision for the kind of India that many of you would like to see.
Of course. But thank you for the conversation. Only Dr. Tharoor and his eloquence could switch the question, flip the question. Instead of giving the answer, he asked me the question. But the idea that you've spent the last 1 hour answering questions on youth, democracy, politics in an unscripted conversation, which we thought of this morning, saying that last evening we had the pleasure of listening to Dr. Bhagwat, so now we should hear another viewpoint. Thank you for agreeing to do this at such short notice. Thank you for being so candid. And thank you for entertaining and inspiring young minds as you always do. You have, as Abhishek corrected me, it's your 13th year, and in the first year you had sent a video message, so I stand corrected. Abhishek knows it better than me. Dr. Tharoor has been associated for 15 years at IIMon, and thank you for always being with us right from the start.
Thank you. Thank you all for